What's up, Goth Gamer Nation? It's fucking me. Video number 100 today, not counting ones I've deleted. It don't matter though. They said it couldn't be done. I said it couldn't be done in the mirror, but we made it. 100 videos, 100 years, 1,000 years. Videos. 1,000 years. That's how long this channel lasts, or until they delete my account.
Original British true crime series. You want as many cameras out there as you can because they tell the real story.
Anywhere, anytime, all your favorite content for free, all in one place. Watch Free UK is available to download on your choice of app store. Start streaming today.
And mind melds, and that they can only go so far, and that they are dangerous undertakings. The Katra is a bit more of a stretch, and it does bring out interesting metaphysical ideas about where is the soul, where is the body, where is the mind, and that's ultimately dependent on what your spiritual viewpoint is. Are you a Platonist or are you an Aristotelian? That's basically going to affect whether or not what you think of that idea of the soul being a collection of brain waves, thought patterns, and electrical signals which can be passed into another brain. So I think, as I say, it's fair to say that as an expression or as a portrayal of telepathy, the Vulcans stand up pretty well to scrutiny. Now moving on to Next Generation, which in many ways is even more based in some of the wackier ideas of the 1960s than indeed original series is. Not least of that is with the Betazoids. This is a very, very powerful form of telepathy. If this is a non-tactile form of telepathy, they don't need to touch you to feel your thoughts. It is passive, it is always active, and it is, as I say, literally telepathy. Deanna Troi, just being an empath, that's just enough. But certainly for most Betazoids, particularly the well-trained ones like Luoxana, they have just full Professor X levels of telepathy. I mean, I don't know if they can necessarily control someone via telepathy. Maybe they just have a law against it, because they definitely have that potential. So this is going to be a difficult one to explain biologically, but I'm going to try. So what I'm going to try is explain it through a biological phenomenon that does exist in the world. So some of you may be aware that some creatures possess the ability of electroreception. That is the ability to detect electrical signals, heartbeat, muscle movements, all those kind of things. One of the main species which does this, perhaps the most famous species, are the sharks. It's also worth noting that actually the design of the Betazoids coincidentally kind of lends some credence to this explanation. Sharks are known for having black eyes, and what do Betazoids have? Black eyes. That's probably just a bit of coincidence, but it would serve as a little bit of support to this idea. So the way electroreception works for sharks is the electrical signals, the electrical impulses, are conducted through the water by the salt particles, and then that's picked up by the ampule of Lorenzini, which are these little pores on the nose of the shark. So that's why that works, is because there is a medium present in the water that allows the transmission of those signals to a receiver. Now, with Betazoids, this gets a little bit more complicated because, of course, we're doing it into thin air. Apparently so. Maybe there's some kind of particles in the air which can conduct brainwaves, thought patterns, or, the neural impulses. Again, these are electrical signals. And perhaps the Betazoid sensors are so attuned that not only can they detect in these electrical signals of other beings around them, but that also they can even detect what kind of temperament or mood that the person is in, which could be helpful in terms of avoiding threats.
When I set up the hedge fund in 2004, I used to look enviously at these kind of banks and think just
safe, or are they hostile? That would actually be quite useful, and we could argue that perhaps the ability to sense thoughts comes from further training and honing of that skills to then better understand the actual thought patterns going on. Again, how accurate their telepathy is questionable, especially when our main example is Luoxana Troy, who is, not necessarily always a reliable sort. So maybe it's through just general electromagnetic fields, but then, okay, well, when you're on a starship or a Faraday cage, is that interfered with? It's not a perfect explanation, but I think it has some merit. The other than stranger thing is that they can transmit thoughts into other telepathic minds and also non-telepathic minds. And that's a bit more strange. I think you can make sense of it that they could project a telepathic thought, but I don't know how you wouldn't just broadcast that to everyone, given that you're in contact with all these other nervous systems and brains through this electromagnetic field, through this, whatever it is, through this form of electroreception, that those brains would also receive that signal. Do you code it in a certain way that only the recipient's brain can understand it, and it's just nothing to anyone else? I don't know. Or indeed, was everyone hearing all the conversations that Luoxana and Deanna were having on the Enterprise? That would be quite embarrassing. Probably not for Luoxana. We then run into even bigger problems, though, because apparently included in this form of telepathy is the ability to sense the thoughts of people who are several light years away through a screen. And you could make the argument of, oh, well, she's sensing it through the subspace connection. And I'm going to say, let's not do that, because my goal here is to avoid just resorting to subspace, because I don't think that that works as a biological explanation. I don't think anyone would biologically evolve connections to subspace, because why? Why would you ever do that? Why would that ever be useful in, evolving on a planet? So I don't see that as a really very good explanation, and that I'm just going to say that Luoxana or Deanna, whenever they're talking to Romulans across the neutral zone, several light years away, and she says, "He's lying, Captain. He's hiding something, Captain." No shit, Deanna. Whenever that happens, that she's just bullshitting, or she's using her counselor training rather than her empathic abilities, because there's no way. And again, even the ability to detect the thoughts of people on other starships, like HAL, those are in their own little contained box of electromagnetic fields and energy, and between you and them is a vacuum of space. Like, say, on a planet, sure, there might be some delay, there may be some difference in terms of its range, so perhaps Betazoids are better able to read the minds of people nearby as opposed to people further away. And once again, if we take it back to that idea of, well, perhaps it was used as a form of threat detection when the Betazoid species was evolving on their planet, that would make some sense. Obviously, the closer minds are of greater concern than those that are further afield, and again, it can be explained that you'd get better at that with training and honing your skills, so that you could reach out to the entire planet and actually establish contact with specific minds. Interestingly, that whole level of telepathy would mean that telecommunication would probably never develop on Beta Z, because why would you need a phone? You can just, with a little bit of training, talk directly to people via the use of telepathy, interestingly enough. So, like I say, there is some biological explanation for this form of telepathy, but it can't go enough to explain why it is so overpowered as we see it in Next Generation. What we see in Next Generation is just above and beyond any biological explanation of telepathy, and again, I think that goes back to when TNG was actually conceived of, and in fact, telepathy remained a very popular thing. So our final example is from the Remans. We don't get a huge amount of information about Reman telepathy, and again it does run into similar problems of Betazoid telepathy. There are a couple of interesting things to note. The first thing to note is that it's both transmissible, but also uses direct tactile contact. So our example is Ron Perlman as Shinzon's Viceroy. He seems to have telepathic abilities. Now, why does he have telepathic abilities? Is it because the Remans as a species have telepathic potential? Perhaps. And then the other half of it is that the Romulans, of course, because they're descended from Vulcans, would have telepathic potential. And given that we see the Viceroy mind melding with Shinzon, basically, I mean, look at where his hands are. His hands are on his head. That looks like a Vulcan mind meld. So there's perhaps reason to believe that there was actually intermixing between Romulans and Remans, interbreeding between the two species, which means that certain Vulcanoid traits, like the ability to conduct mind melds by use of tactile contact, were then passed down through Remans, maybe as a recessive gene, maybe it's a 1 in a million ability, but certainly we do see that it is present. Moving beyond that to the sort of more broad, long-range telepathy that we see them use to attack Deanna, you could argue that it is some kind of evolution of echolocation, maybe through ultra-high or ultra-low frequencies, these extreme frequencies of sound waves that are so far beyond the audible perception that your subconscious perceives them and thus can receive those signals. That would make some sense, given what the Remans look like. They look like they are descended in some way from bats, so that would have a bit of merit there. And then also consider their environment. Their environment is dark. We don't know necessarily if the Remans were tunnel dwellers, but certainly they've been tunnel dwellers for a long time, so perhaps that led to them enhancing their abilities. Direct communication is difficult in tunnels, and also, not to mention, sometimes dangerous. You can cause a cave-in. And so the ability to communicate non-verbally through these ultrasonic sound waves would again make some sense in terms of a survival trait. Once again, we run into the problem, well, how then does it reach across the gulf of space? And I don't really have a very good explanation for that. The other thing to point out is that these sound waves are then processed as almost a visual contact, which again, I don't know how you would necessarily translate these so correctly between two different species. I don't know how you could send these signals in such a way that it would then affect the visual cortex of the recipient. That's a bit strange as well. So once again, we run into the difficulties of the vast gulf of space, but I think there is some explanation, both from the idea of interbreeding between Romulans and Remans, and then also from the fact that the Remans are a bat-like species that would probably have some form of echolocation and other hypersonic forms of communication that to us would appear like telepathy, but perhaps to them it's just an extension of language used in lieu of verbal language. Think about how hand signals, not just sign language, but hand signals can often be used when verbal language can't be used for whatever reason. So, to wrap up, I think these days we'd say that ideas like telepathy in sci-fi is really more the provenance of franchises like Dune or Star Wars. You know, the stuff that is far more fantastical in its presentation and, you know, doesn't necessarily deal in modern science and biology and physics in the way that Star Trek does, or did. But I think what we can say here is that there are biological explanations, and while telepathy may seem remarkable and absurd to us, bearing in mind we're talking about aliens here. And, you know, once again, go back to that Leonard Nimoy explanation for Mr. Spock. This was actually about Mr. Spock and the Vulcan nerve pinch, but it's just as applicable here. And he said to the producer, he said, well, you know, this man is an alien. He might have abilities and understanding of the human anatomy that we don't. So, you know, that was his explanation for the Vulcan nerve pinch. And that's kind of the approach we should take to alien species, is we don't know what they can do. That's the whole point of Star Trek, is that we can have aliens that do very different things. Too often we just have aliens that are just humans with stuff on their face, and that's not necessarily that interesting. When you introduce things like telepathy and then you actually develop those ideas and you think about those ideas, the Voyager episode where B'Elanna gets in trouble for spreading violent thoughts among a peaceful planet of telepaths, that's quite interesting, and so that's what Star Trek allows us to do and explore. So I think there is still merit to having telepathy in Star Trek. I think it can tell some very interesting stories, but we should try and keep in mind what is biologically realistic. Physics ultimately has sway over biology, and there are hard limits when it comes to the vacuum and gulf of space. And it doesn't matter how good your telepathy is, you're not beating that. And the other thing to think about, just to wrap up, is that oftentimes telepathy is portrayed as this great way of communicating between minds, and these telepathic species, the Telosians, they feel so superior because they have moved beyond the need for verbal communication. But another thing to consider, particularly when you're engaging in telepathic contact between different species, different minds, different ways of seeing the universe and seeing life, is that thought can be just as cryptic as language. So thank you all for watching. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next video. Thank you to my members for supporting the channel. My glorious Navarks, Tully DT, Rella, David Reeves, Macross Schaffer, and Sean Farrell. My loyal commanders, Philip Tye, Birdmonster, Jeff Hallam, Mark Philippe, Robert Sampson, Narata, Nathaniel Mead, Gabe Logan, Adam Bowman, Nicholas Walsh, JC Tech Wizard, Alcara Dreamer, Joe G, Scotty O, and Der Monarch. And I salute my Centurions, Pendlebury, Marcus Hall, Julian Arnott, Freedom Trooper, Okokatum Quaestor, John Nicole, Athens Collection, Tobias Klein, Marzari, Bird of Play D3, Khan the Skektal Overlord, David Jackson, Andy Clark, and Guy Haslam. And I thank all my loyal sub-lieutenants. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel, and I will see you all in the next video. Many species lay claim to the title of greatest warrior. The Klingon hides her insecurities and abandonment issues. She used to belong to the school's basketball club, but has quit going. She's also secretly dating a 20-year-old teacher in training at the school named Kazuya Kitamura. Her best friend is Chisato Itsushima. The two have been classmates since elementary school. Chisato is a member of the school's archery club. She's quiet and thoughtful, and it's shown on several occasions that Chisato has some level of psychic ability. She has a strong connection to the spirit world, or other side as it's referred to in-game. Finally, there's Mika Kishi, a first-year student who has an
an interest in rumors and the supernatural. It was she who started the unofficial paranormal investigation club, kind of forcing her way into Yukari and Chisato's friendship. She takes photos and recordings sometimes during their adventures and sends them to paranormal magazines for a bit of extra money. She belongs to the badminton and lacrosse clubs at school. She's very energetic and is sometimes depicted as a bit of an airhead, but that may also be a way of portraying her as younger and more naive than Yukari and Chisato. Yukari often treats Mika coldly and acts annoyed when Mika bothers her and Chisato with rumors and ghost stories. But it's clear that Yukari is also interested in those rumors and actually cares about Mika. Their friendship develops and deepens as the games continue. There are several instances where the girls get on each other's nerves, argue with each other, and even leave each other behind in certain situations. I feel like these contentious moments add depth to their characters and just makes them more interesting. I always find internal conflict between main characters really engaging. It's way better and more realistic than everyone just being buddy-buddy all the time. In one rumor, when Yukari angrily leaves Mika alone at a haunted train station and forces Chisato to leave with her, you feel genuine worry for Mika's safety as you're forced to take control of her and wander the platform alone, before the girls eventually reunite and apologize to each other. There's one more character who plays an important role in some of the girls' investigations, and that's the paranormal researcher Aramata. He's never seen in-game, at least not in the Twilight Syndrome games, but he's an acquaintance of Mika's, probably through the paranormal magazines that she sends her photos and audio recordings to. Mika can choose to contact him by phone during certain scenarios, and he'll usually give long-winded explanations of history or other supernatural events that may or may not contain hints on how to progress in the current investigation. Automata will play a slightly larger role in Moonlight Syndrome, so it's worth mentioning him here. A typical scenario in Twilight Syndrome opens with Mika roping Yukari and Chisato into investigating a rumor she's heard about the school or the town, and the three of them then go off searching these locations for clues. You'll mainly control Yukari, with the other girls following along, but there are times where they split up or are separated, and you'll end up controlling either Mika or Chisato. Though the game is played on a 2D plane with sprite-based characters, the environments in the game are 3D, giving it a 2.5D presentation. And there are some neat instances where you move forward or backward through a hallway in the school, through a connecting corridor, or up and down stairs. It all adds just a little bit of depth, quite literally, to an otherwise 2D game. It's nothing mind-blowing, but I liked the effect. Inashiro High School, where several of the investigations take place, has both a new school building and an older building. Both give off different levels of creepiness. Fully illustrated 2D scenes also crop up from time to time, and I really liked the style of these. They add a lot to the spooky atmosphere. I also love the girls' walking animations. You can tell the girls' personalities just at a glance thanks to their distinctiveness. Yukari out in front